The poor little boy brought milk to the dying Apache. Next week, 400 warriors came for him. The sun had barely risen over the small village on the edge of the plains, painting the earth with soft shades of gold. The air smelled of dry grass and fresh dirt, and the wind carried the faint sound of cattle lowing in the distance. In this poor village, life was hard. Most families lived in small, worn-out cabins made of wood and mud. Every day was a struggle to find enough food, water, and firewood. Among these families was a young boy named Eli, a child no older than 10, but with a spirit far older than his years. His clothes were patched in several places, his shoes too small and worn through, yet his face carried a softness that made people pause and notice the kindness in his eyes. Eli's mornings always began the same way. He rose before the sun, quietly helping his mother carry water from the river, then milked the few cows they had. Every pail of milk mattered. It was enough to feed his family, and sometimes he could trade it for bread or vegetables with neighbors. Eli's life was simple, but it was a life of responsibility. Unlike many children his age, he knew the meaning of hard work and the importance of helping others. Even so, he carried no complaint, only a sense of duty and an understanding that kindness was worth more than wealth. One bright morning, Eli was sent with a small pail of milk to a neighbor across the village. The path he walked ran alongside the edge of the forest, a place both mysterious and dangerous. As he trudged along, balancing the pail carefully in his small hands, his eyes caught a faint column of smoke rising behind the trees. It was unusual. There was no fire permitted in the forest, and villagers always stayed clear of it. Eli's heart beat faster, not from fear but from curiosity. Something about that smoke drew him forward, a feeling he could not explain. As he approached cautiously, moving quietly so as not to disturb whatever had caused the smoke, he saw a figure lying under a large tree. At first he thought it might be an animal, but as he drew nearer he realized it was a man. The man was pale, his clothes torn and dirty and his body covered with cuts and bruises. His breathing was shallow, and he seemed too weak to move. Eli froze for a moment, remembering all the stories he had heard from the elders about Apache warriors and the dangers of strangers from the plains. But when he looked into the man's eyes, he did not see anger or threat. He saw pain, and more than that, he saw someone who needed help. Eli's hands trembled slightly as he held the pail of milk. He knew he could turn back, leave the man to his fate, and return to the safety of his village. Many would have done exactly that. But something inside him would not allow it. The boy stepped closer, lowering the pail carefully so it would not spill. "Drink this," he said softly, unsure if the man could understand him. The warrior's lips moved, and with great effort he sipped the milk, the warmth and sweetness bringing a hint of strength back to his body. Eli watched silently, heart pounding, as the man's breathing grew steadier. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the clearing. Eli stayed beside the man, talking in soft, gentle tones, telling stories about the village, about the cows, about small things that he thought might make the man feel less alone. The Apache, though weak, listened, occasionally nodding or murmuring a word that Eli could not understand. There was a quiet connection between them, a bond formed not by words but by the shared recognition of kindness. The boy worked carefully, taking off his small coat to cover the man's bare shoulders, using leaves and branches to make a small shelter from the harsh wind that swept through the forest. By mid-afternoon, the boy realized he had been there for hours. The forest was quieter now, the sounds of birds and insects filling the air in place of the wind. Eli knew he could not stay forever. He needed to return to his family before they began to worry. Yet the thought of leaving the man alone made his chest ache. After a moment of hesitation, he decided to make a plan. He carefully adjusted the makeshift shelter, placing a few branches over the man for shade, and then covered him lightly with his coat. He promised softly, "I will come back tomorrow. You will be okay." As he made his way back to the village, Eli's mind raced. He could hear whispers in the back of his mind, voices warning him of danger, yet he ignored them. This was not about fear. It was about doing what was right, even if it carried risk. By the time he reached his small cabin, the sun was beginning its descent, turning the sky into shades of orange and pink. His mother was at the door, her face a mixture of worry and relief. "Where have you been, Eli?" she asked. The boy only shook his head, smiling faintly. "Just helping someone," he replied. That night, as the village slept under the blanket of a darkening sky, Eli could not stop thinking about the man in the forest. He wondered if he had done enough, if he had done it right. He lay awake, listening to the distant sounds of animals in the plains, and felt a quiet hope that the man would survive until he could return with more food, water, and care. He also felt something else, a sense of connection to a world larger than his small village, a reminder that even in the hardest places, acts of kindness could make a difference. The next morning, Eli rose early again, carrying another pail of milk. He moved with determination this time, not hesitation, as he made his way back through the forest. The sun was just rising, casting long, golden streaks through the trees. When he reached the clearing, he was relieved to see the Apache man still there, propped against the tree, looking weaker but alive. Eli smiled, offering the milk. The man drank slowly, eyes meeting the boy's with a mixture of gratitude and surprise. Eli felt a warmth in his chest, a sense that even the smallest person could change the world in ways bigger than themselves. Days passed, and Eli continued to visit the man. Each time he brought small amounts of food and water, staying long enough to talk, to comfort, and to keep the man company. The villagers began to notice his absence during these trips, and whispers started to grow. "What is the boy doing out there every day?" they asked. "Is he courting danger?" But Eli did not care about the whispers. He only cared about the man who needed him, the man whose life now depended on a small boy's courage and compassion. Over time, the Apache began to regain strength. He could sit up for longer periods, speak a few words, and even smile when Eli arrived. They could not communicate perfectly, but gestures, glances, and the shared moments created a bond that was stronger than any language. Eli felt a deep sense of pride, not in being brave, but in knowing that his small actions were making a real difference. The forest, once a place of mystery and fear, had become a place of hope. By the end of the first week, the boy had formed a habit of helping the man each morning before attending to his family's chores. He knew the risks, knew the stories of revenge and anger that floated across the plains, but he also knew that kindness was a choice, one he would not abandon. The little pail of milk that he carried daily was not just nourishment. It was hope, it was compassion, it was a symbol that even in a hard world, humanity could shine through. And so, each day, as Eli walked through the forest, he carried more than milk. He carried courage, compassion, and a quiet understanding that small acts, even by a poor little boy, could echo in ways no one could imagine. He could not know that these simple mornings of care, these quiet moments beneath a tree, would soon change not only his life but the lives of hundreds of others. The boy returned home that evening, tired but satisfied. He lay on his small bed of straw, thinking about the man in the forest. The wind whispered through the trees outside, carrying with it a promise that courage and kindness, no matter how small, would never be forgotten. The days passed quietly in the village, but not without tension. Eli's secret trips to the forest had begun to draw attention. Villagers whispered among themselves as they noticed the boy leaving early each morning, returning only at midday with dirt-streaked clothes and tired eyes. Some of the elders frowned and shook their heads. "Why does he go there alone? The forest is dangerous." "He could be hurt or worse," one of them said, worry creasing his weathered face. Others were curious, but fear kept them silent. Eli, however, paid little attention to the whispers. His heart was fully focused on the Apache man, whose body was slowly healing thanks to the boy's care. Each day, Eli brought a small bundle of food, a few slices of bread, some dried meat, and the daily pail of milk. The Apache, whose name Eli would later learn was Takoda, began to respond to these gestures with quiet gratitude. His eyes, once dull with pain, now sparkled with the faint light of recovery. He could sit up for longer periods and even managed to smile when Eli approached. Though he spoke a language Eli could not understand, their shared gestures created a bond stronger than words. Eli had learned quickly how to care for Takoda. He cleaned his wounds gently, made sure he had enough water to drink, and kept him covered from the harsh sun. Sometimes he would tell Takoda stories about his village, about the cows, the river, and the other children who ran and played near the edges of the fields. He spoke in simple words, slowly and clearly, hoping the Apache could follow. Takoda listened, his expressions shifting between curiosity and amusement. When Eli accidentally tripped over a root or spilled milk, Takoda would chuckle softly, a sound that warmed the boy's heart. Despite the growing connection, the village continued to simmer with unease. Parents warned their children not to wander near the forest, and Eli's own family worried deeply. His mother often pleaded, "Eli, be careful. You are just a small boy. You do not know what might be out there." But Eli, though he respected her concern, could not ignore his sense of duty. To him, leaving Takoda alone, weak and wounded, was unthinkable. Each day, he felt more certain that his actions, though dangerous, were the right thing to do. As the week continued, Eli noticed a change in Takoda. The man began to move with more strength, sitting upright without support, and even attempting to stand with Eli's assistance. The boy cheered quietly, proud of the small victories. "You are getting stronger," he said one morning, his eyes shining. Takoda's lips moved in response, and though Eli could not understand the words, the warmth of appreciation was clear. It was a feeling Eli had never experienced before, a deep connection that transcended age, language, and even the distance between their worlds. Eli's visits became more routine. Every morning, before the sun had fully risen, he would grab a pail of milk, a small piece of bread, and a few scraps of dried meat. He would make his way carefully along the narrow path to the clearing where Takoda waited. The forest, once intimidating and mysterious, had become a place of purpose. Birds chirped overhead, and the rustle of leaves felt almost like a welcome. Eli found comfort in the quiet of the trees, in the shared moments of care and attention. Each day, the boy's confidence grew alongside Takoda's strength, but not everyone in the village understood the boy's intentions. Rumors began to circulate. Some villagers claimed they had seen Takoda from a distance, and whispers of danger started to spread. "The Apache might return with more warriors. Eli is putting us all at risk," some said. Others argued, "He is only helping someone who was hurt. That is no crime." The debates were quiet but tense, simmering in the background as life in the village continued. Eli, however, ignored the gossip. His focus remained on the man who had no one else to care for him. One day, while Eli was cleaning Takoda's wounds, he noticed that the man was trying to reach for a small bundle tied with cloth. Carefully, Eli opened it and found a carved pendant, simple yet beautiful, with designs that told a story of a life far beyond the village. Takoda held it out to Eli, pointing at him and then at the pendant. The boy realized the gesture was one of thanks, a symbol of trust and connection. Eli accepted it humbly, tucking it into his small pocket, feeling proud that his care had earned such gratitude. The bond between the boy and the man continued to deepen. Eli would sit beside Takoda for hours, telling stories, asking questions, and sometimes simply sharing silence. He noticed small details, the way Takoda's eyes followed the movement of birds, the faint scars on his hands that spoke of past struggles, and the quiet dignity in his posture despite the pain he had endured. These observations gave Eli a sense of respect, not just for Takoda's strength, but for his courage and resilience. During this time, Eli also began to notice subtle changes in himself. He felt a new sense of confidence and maturity. Tasks that had once seemed difficult, the long walk to the forest, the careful tending of wounds, the balancing of responsibilities at home, became manageable. He learned to move quietly and efficiently, to plan his visits with care, and to think ahead for the man's needs. It was a growth that he did not yet fully understand, but he felt proud of the courage it required. Eli's mother watched these changes with mixed feelings. She was proud of her son's bravery, but deeply concerned for his safety. "You are a good boy, Eli," she said one evening as he returned home. "But the world outside our village is not always kind. You must be careful." Eli nodded, understanding her worry, but his thoughts were already back in the forest, imagining the relief on Takoda's face when he returned the next morning. As the week drew on, the Apache man's recovery continued. He could now speak a few words, though slowly and with effort. His eyes brightened when Eli arrived, and the simple gestures of offering food, water, and kindness became a daily ritual. Eli learned to read Takoda's expressions, understanding when he was hungry, tired, or in discomfort. The boy's care was not just physical, it was emotional, a recognition that healing required both body and heart. Meanwhile, the villagers continued to observe Eli's actions from a distance. Some began to soften, realizing that the boy's care was genuine and that Takoda was not a threat. Others remained wary, unsure of the intentions of a man from a distant tribe. Yet Eli paid no attention to the fear or gossip. His actions were guided by empathy and the understanding that everyone deserved help in times of need. One afternoon, as Eli helped Taco to sit up and drink the last of the milk, a sudden movement in the trees startled the boy. A small rabbit darted across the path, causing both him and Takoda to laugh quietly. It was a rare moment of lightness, a reminder that even in difficult circumstances, small joys could be found. Eli smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment. Despite the challenges, he had managed to create a safe space, a small sanctuary where trust and care flourished. By the end of the second week, Takoda was noticeably stronger. He could stand with Eli's support, and sometimes he walked short distances on his own. The boy felt a sense of pride, not in his own strength, but in the progress of someone who had faced great danger and pain. Each day's effort, each careful gesture had made a real difference. Eli understood that true courage was quiet and steady, shown not in grand actions, but in small, consistent acts of care. Eli also began to understand the value of trust. Takoda had no reason to rely on a young boy, yet he did. He accepted Eli's help without fear, placing his life in the hands of someone so small and seemingly powerless. This trust was a lesson for Eli, teaching him that kindness could bridge differences, and that courage was not measured by size or age, but by the heart. As the days turned into weeks, Eli's routine became a quiet rhythm of life. Wake, prepare milk and food, travel to the forest, tend to Takoda, and return home. Each trip strengthened the bond between the boy and the man, and each act of care reinforced a lesson that Eli would carry for the rest of his life. That empathy and compassion were powerful tools, capable of changing the world in ways that fear and suspicion never could. The villagers, slowly observing this transformation, began to shift their perception. While fear and caution remained, many recognized the goodness of Eli's actions. They saw a young boy who acted selflessly, who risked his safety to help another human being. Some quietly admired him, others still whispered warnings, but the fear that had dominated the village was beginning to fade. By the end of Part 2, the forest clearing had become a place of hope. Takoda, once weak and wounded, now showed signs of recovery. Eli, though small and poor, had shown courage and compassion that exceeded what most adults could achieve. The bond between them, built on trust and care, was growing stronger each day, quietly setting the stage for events that would soon ripple far beyond the forest and the village. Eli's days in the forest had become a rhythm he cherished. Each morning he would rise before the sun, quietly slipping out of his small cabin, careful not to wake his family. His mother often worried, peeking out the window to see if he had returned safely, but Eli always smiled, reassuring her with a nod before disappearing into the golden light of dawn. The forest no longer felt frightening to him. Its trees, once strange and towering, now seemed protective, their leaves whispering softly as he walked the narrow path to the clearing where Takoda waited. Takoda had grown stronger since the first days of Eli's care. His breathing was steady, his wounds closing, and he could sit for long stretches without help. Yet his gratitude for the boy never wavered. Each day he would gesture and speak in his soft, deliberate language, pointing at the pail of milk or the bundle of food that Eli brought, smiling when he understood that he would not go hungry or thirsty. Eli, in turn, listened carefully to Takoda's gestures and expressions, learning the subtle ways he communicated. The boy realized that trust, once earned, could be more powerful than words. The villagers' curiosity and fear had grown. Mothers whispered warnings to their children, and elders debated what might happen if word of Takoda's presence spread beyond the village. "The Apache might come looking for him," one man said cautiously. "And if they find him here, what then?" Others shook their heads, insisting that Eli's care was an act of courage, not recklessness. Some admired the boy quietly, though fear kept them from speaking openly. Eli heard none of these discussions. His attention was solely on Takoda, whose recovery he had nurtured day by day. One morning, Eli noticed a change in Takoda. The man had been trying to stand without assistance, and after a few careful attempts, he managed to rise on his own. His legs wobbled at first, but Eli steadied him gently, offering encouragement. "See, you are strong," he said, smiling. Takoda returned a weak but warm smile, a silent acknowledgement of the boy's support. Eli felt a surge of pride, not for himself, but for the man who had endured so much and was now regaining his strength. As Takoda grew stronger, he began to explore the clearing more actively. He examined the trees and bushes, occasionally pointing to a bird or a plant, showing Eli aspects of his life outside the village he had come from. Through these gestures, Eli learned small stories of the plains and the Apache people, of distant hills and flowing rivers, of families and warriors who valued courage and honor. Though Eli could not understand every detail, he felt the depth of Takoda's world, and it inspired him. The forest clearing was no longer just a place of healing. It had become a classroom, a place where the boy learned not only compassion, but also courage and respect for lives far beyond his own. Eli began to notice that Takoda's presence had a subtle effect on the forest itself. Birds seemed to approach more closely, as if sensing the peaceful energy between the two of them. Small animals scurried nearby without fear, and the clearing became a quiet sanctuary, a space untouched by the hardships that surrounded the village. Eli often paused to take in the scene, feeling a sense of calm that he had never known before. These moments reinforced his determination to continue caring for Takoda, no matter the risks. One afternoon, Eli decided to build a slightly larger shelter for Takoda. The wind had become stronger, and he knew the man would need more protection from the elements. He gathered branches, leaves, and soft moss, constructing a small but sturdy space where Takoda could rest comfortably. Takoda watched the boy work, occasionally pointing and giving small gestures of approval. Eli worked carefully, knowing that even small mistakes could make the shelter unstable. By the time the sun dipped low, the structure was complete, offering shade, comfort, and a sense of security. The boy stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow, and Takoda nodded in appreciation. Despite the growing bond and the small victories, Eli could sense a shift in the forest. The quiet clearing now seemed more alive with tension. The distant sound of hooves occasionally drifted on the wind, and Eli could not ignore the possibility that others were observing from afar. While he had never experienced true danger in these woods, he understood that life could change in a single moment. This awareness made him more cautious, yet it did not deter him. His commitment to Takoda was unwavering. By the middle of the week, Takoda had regained enough strength to walk short distances on his own. He moved slowly, testing his legs, but each step was a triumph. Eli accompanied him, providing steady support and words of encouragement. The boy marveled at the resilience of the man before him. He had seen Takoda at his weakest, pale and wounded, and now he watched him reclaim strength that seemed almost miraculous. Eli felt a mixture of pride, awe, and responsibility, knowing that his care had contributed to this recovery. Word of Eli's visits had begun to spread subtly among the villagers. Children who played near the edge of the forest had noticed him leaving with the milk pail each morning and returning tired but smiling. They whispered to each other, curious about what he was doing. Some adults heard these whispers and began to question Eli's choices, while others quietly admired his bravery. The village's opinion was divided, but Eli remained focused. He understood that actions mattered more than words, and he continued his routine, bringing milk, food, and comfort to Takoda each day. During one visit, Eli noticed Takoda examining a small, carved stone that Eli had never seen before. The man held it in his hands, tracing its lines and shapes carefully. He gestured to Eli, then to the pail of milk, and smiled. The boy understood that the gesture was one of thanks, a recognition that the care and food he provided were meaningful. Eli accepted the silent gratitude humbly, feeling a warmth in his chest that had little to do with pride and much to do with connection. As the week progressed, Eli realized that Takoda was no longer just a patient. He was becoming a friend, a teacher, and a presence that enriched the boy's understanding of the world. The small clearing in the forest had become a place of learning, trust, and quiet adventure. Eli found joy in teaching Takoda about the village, sharing small stories of daily life, and learning in return about a world he had never imagined. The bond between them transcended age, language, and circumstance, creating a connection neither could fully explain. Eli's mother continued to worry. She watched him leave each morning, biting her lip in concern. She knew the boy was brave, but she also knew how unpredictable life could be. One evening, as Eli returned home, she asked softly, "Did anything happen today?" Eli shook his head, smiling faintly. "No, Mama, everything is fine," he replied. His words were simple, but they carried the quiet confidence of someone who had faced challenges and continued to act with compassion. By the end of the week, Takoda was able to walk through the forest with Eli without assistance. He moved more confidently, exploring small areas beyond the clearing, always returning to the shade of the tree where he had first been found. Eli watched him with quiet admiration, understanding that the man's recovery was not just physical, it was emotional as well. Trust had played a key role, and Eli's consistent kindness had allowed Takoda to regain not only strength but also hope. Despite the progress, Eli remained aware that the forest was not entirely safe. He had seen distant figures moving among the trees, though none had approached. The boy knew that the plains were full of unknowns, and he could not predict what might happen next. Yet fear never overcame his determination. Each morning he set out with the same care and courage, bringing milk and food, tending to wounds, and offering comfort. The boy understood that small, consistent acts of kindness could have a profound impact, and he lived this truth every day. During one visit, Eli noticed that Takoda had begun to gather small sticks and leaves, arranging them in neat piles near the clearing. The boy realized that the Apache man was preparing for something, perhaps building tools or planning for future needs. Eli joined him, learning the small skills Takoda demonstrated, from creating simple structures to observing the forest for signs of wildlife. The lessons were subtle, but Eli absorbed them quickly, fascinated by the practical knowledge and quiet wisdom of the man he cared for. As the sun set each evening, Eli would leave the forest reluctantly, knowing he had done all he could for the day. He returned home tired but fulfilled, carrying the knowledge that his actions had made a real difference. Takoda's eyes, bright and clear, followed him as he walked away, a silent promise that the bond between them would continue. Eli felt a quiet pride, understanding that courage was not measured by strength alone, but by the willingness to act with compassion even when the outcome was uncertain. By the end of Part 3, the forest clearing had become a sanctuary of trust, care, and subtle growth. Takoda, once weak and helpless, was regaining strength and hope, while Eli, the poor little boy, had learned lessons of courage, empathy, and the power of consistent kindness. The village remained a distant backdrop, filled with curiosity and quiet worry, but the bond between the boy and the man had become unshakable, setting the stage for events that would soon extend far beyond the small clearing in the woods. Eli had been caring for Takoda for several weeks now, and their bond had grown stronger with each passing day. The boy had learned the rhythm of the forest, the quiet movements of animals, the way the sunlight shifted through the trees, and the way the wind carried distant sounds from the plains. Each morning he rose before the sun, filled a small pail with fresh milk, and carefully made his way along the familiar path, keeping alert for any sign of danger. Takoda's recovery had progressed steadily, and Eli felt a quiet pride in the man's growing strength. Yet the forest was no longer as calm as it had been. Over the past few days, Eli had noticed signs that they were not entirely alone. Occasionally, he saw distant figures moving along the ridges of the hills, shadows that disappeared when he tried to get a closer look. He sensed movement in the brush, rustling that did not match the normal rhythm of the forest. His heart would race, but he reminded himself that the forest was their sanctuary. The boy's focus remained on Takoda, who had begun to walk more confidently and explore the clearing on his own. On one bright morning, Eli arrived with a pail of milk and some bread he had saved from home. Takoda was standing near the edge of the clearing, his eyes scanning the trees. As Eli approached, he noticed a faint frown on the man's face. Takoda pointed toward the forest and then gestured toward Eli, clearly trying to communicate something important. Eli paused, considering the possibilities. Perhaps the movements he had sensed were scouts from Takoda's own people, or maybe they were villagers curious about the boy's repeated trips to the forest. Either way, the boy understood that caution was necessary. Eli set down the milk and food, and together he and Takoda moved through the clearing, finding a small cluster of rocks that offered a higher vantage point. From there, they could see far across the plains. In the distance, Eli's eyes widened as he noticed a large group of riders approaching. The figures were mounted on sturdy horses, moving in organized lines, their numbers far greater than anything he had seen before. Takoda's eyes brightened slightly, and he pointed toward the group, then gestured to Eli with urgency. The boy realized that these were not threats. These were Takoda's people, the Apache warriors, returning to check on their companion. The forest clearing that had once felt private now seemed fragile. Eli felt a mix of awe and nervousness. He had never seen so many riders at once. The sound of hooves thundering across the plains grew louder with each passing moment, and the earth beneath him seemed to vibrate with the rhythm of their approach. Takoda motioned for Eli to remain calm, and the boy nodded, understanding that the warrior's arrival could be both a blessing and a source of tension. As the riders drew closer, Eli could see the leader of the group, a tall man with a strong presence and careful, deliberate movements. He was clearly someone of great respect among the warriors, and Takoda gestured toward him repeatedly. Eli's heart pounded. He had done nothing but care for a wounded man, yet now he faced the full force of an entire tribe, hundreds of warriors who could have been dangerous if they had misinterpreted his intentions. The leader dismounted and approached cautiously. Takoda greeted him with familiar gestures, and the other warriors followed suit, spreading out to form a respectful circle around the clearing. Eli stood frozen for a moment, unsure what to do. Takoda placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, signaling that he should remain calm. The boy felt a mixture of fear and pride. Fear because the warriors could have reacted aggressively, and pride because Takoda had trusted him enough to ensure they would not harm him. The leader's eyes met Eli's, and for a moment silence fell across the clearing. Then with a careful gesture, the leader handed Eli a small carved medallion. The design was intricate, depicting a scene of mountains, rivers, and people, symbolizing strength, respect, and gratitude. Takoda gestured toward the medallion, and Eli understood that it was a token of honor, a recognition of his courage and kindness. His small hands trembled as he accepted it, feeling the weight of its meaning more than its physical weight. The warriors did not speak harsh words. Instead, they bowed their heads slightly, acknowledging the boy's bravery. Eli's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and wonder. He had risked so much simply to care for a man who had needed help, and now he realized that his actions had earned respect across a world much larger than his village. The realization was both humbling and empowering. As the day progressed, Eli learned more about the Apache warriors. Through gestures and simple words, he understood that they had come not to punish, but to check on their companion and to meet the boy who had shown such remarkable courage. The clearing, once a private sanctuary, had become a place of unity, where trust and care had created a bridge between two worlds. Eli felt a quiet joy, realizing that his small acts of kindness had connected him to a larger story, one filled with honor, respect, and the enduring power of empathy. The villagers, meanwhile, had noticed the riders approaching from the distance. Some ran to the edge of the village, curious and fearful, unsure of what they would see. Mothers held their children close, and elders whispered warnings, their imaginations running wild with possibilities. Yet as the warriors drew nearer, the tension in the village began to shift. The riders did not appear threatening. They were organized, disciplined, and respectful, and their purpose seemed clear. Villagers watched in awe as the boy from their village stood at the center of the clearing, calm and composed, beside the man he had cared for. Takoda moved among the warriors, gesturing and explaining in his language. Though Eli could not understand the words, he could see the pride and gratitude on the faces of the warriors as they listened. One by one, they approached Eli, offering gestures of respect, placing a hand over their hearts and bowing slightly. The boy felt a mixture of nervousness and wonder, realizing that his simple acts of kindness had created a ripple effect far beyond what he had imagined. Throughout the afternoon, Eli learned small lessons from the warriors. They showed him simple ways to care for someone who was recovering from injury, techniques for observing the land, and the importance of patience and attentiveness. Takoda's presence remained central, but the boy began to see the larger world around him, a world filled with people who valued courage, empathy, and responsibility. Each lesson, each gesture of respect, reinforced the truth that even a small act could have a profound impact. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, the warriors prepared to return to their lands. Before leaving, the leader approached Eli once more, placing a hand on his shoulder and giving a gesture of honor that required no words. Eli understood completely. He had earned their respect not through wealth, strength, or status, but through compassion, courage, and consistency. Takoda smiled, a proud and gentle expression, signaling that the boy had done more than anyone could have expected. The forest clearing, now quiet once again, felt different to Eli. It had changed from a place of healing to a place of connection, a place where courage and kindness had been witnessed and honored. He felt a new sense of confidence and responsibility, understanding that his actions had consequences far beyond his immediate surroundings. The boy who had once been poor and unnoticed now stood as a symbol of empathy and bravery, recognized not just by one man, but by an entire tribe of warriors. When Eli returned to the village that evening, he was greeted with curiosity and admiration. Word had spread quickly about the large group of warriors and their respectful visit. The villagers, once fearful of the forest and wary of outsiders, now looked at Eli with new eyes. They saw not a small boy, but someone who had acted with integrity, courage, and kindness. Mothers whispered to their children, elders nodded in approval, and even those who had once doubted him felt a sense of respect. Eli's mother embraced him, relief and pride mingling in her expression. "You have done something remarkable," she said softly. "Not just for him, but for all of us." Eli smiled, though his thoughts remained with Takoda and the warriors. He understood that his actions were not about recognition, but about doing what was right. The honor he had received was a reflection of the truth he had always known. That kindness and courage, even from the smallest person, could inspire respect, trust, and connection across worlds. That night, as Eli lay on his straw bed, he reflected on the events of the day. The forest clearing, the warriors, Takoda's recovery, all of it had shown him a truth he would never forget. Courage was quiet, consistency mattered, and even the smallest acts of kindness could create ripples that touched lives far beyond what one could see. He held the medallion the warriors had given him tightly, a tangible reminder of a lesson he would carry forever. By the end of Part 4, Eli understood that the world was larger than his village, filled with people of strength, honor, and empathy. His small actions had connected him to this world in ways he had never imagined, and the bond between him and Takoda had created a bridge between two very different lives. The forest clearing, once a place of danger and uncertainty, had become a symbol of hope, courage, and the enduring power of human kindness. The forest clearing was quiet in the early morning light, but Eli could feel a new energy in the air. Birds chirped softly, and the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint smell of damp earth. The previous day had been extraordinary, and Eli still carried the memory of the Apache warriors' arrival and the medallion they had given him. He held it carefully in his pocket as he made his way toward Takoda, the man who had changed his life in ways he could not yet fully understand. Takoda stood near the edge of the clearing, the morning sun casting long shadows across his recovering form. He looked stronger than ever, moving with a confidence he had not possessed when Eli first found him wounded. The boy's heart swelled with pride as he approached, carrying the small pail of milk and a piece of bread he had saved for him. Takoda nodded in greeting, a silent acknowledgement that words were no longer necessary between them. Their bond was deeper than language, built on trust, care, and shared experience. Eli set down the milk and food, and the two of them settled near the tree where Takoda had first been discovered. They shared a quiet moment, observing the forest around them. Eli noticed that Takoda's movements were careful but steady, each step a reminder of how far he had come. The boy reflected on the weeks that had passed, the early mornings, the long walks to the clearing, the hours spent tending to wounds, and the countless small acts of kindness that had led to this moment. He understood that bravery was not just in action but in consistency, in choosing to care every day even when it was difficult. Suddenly, in the distance, the sound of hooves echoed across the plains once again. Eli's heart raced, and he glanced at Takoda. The man's eyes brightened, and he pointed toward the approaching riders with a mix of recognition and relief. Eli realized immediately that the warriors were returning, not with aggression, but with purpose and respect. This time, their presence felt like a celebration, a recognition of the bond between Takoda and the boy who had saved him. As the warriors approached, Eli could see that their numbers were even greater than before. Their horses moved in unison, and the discipline in their formation suggested a tribe united in honor and respect. Takoda gestured to Eli, indicating that he should stay calm. The boy nodded, holding the pail of milk tightly as the riders slowed near the clearing. The lead warrior, the same man who had given Eli the medallion, dismounted and approached with deliberate steps. His expression was serious but kind, and his eyes conveyed understanding without a single word being spoken. The warriors formed a circle around the clearing, creating a protective and respectful space for Eli and Takoda. Eli felt a mixture of awe and nervousness. He was just a small boy, yet here he stood, recognized by hundreds of warriors from a distant land. Takoda placed a reassuring hand on Eli's shoulder, and the boy felt a calm confidence settle over him. He realized that the acts he had performed out of kindness and courage had reached far beyond what he had imagined. The medallion, now tucked securely in his pocket, seemed to symbolize not just gratitude but connection, a bridge between two very different worlds. The lead warrior stepped forward, carefully observing Eli. Then, with a gesture that combined authority and respect, he extended a hand toward the boy. Eli hesitated for a moment, unsure what to do, then reached out. The warrior placed a small carved token in Eli's hand, a symbol of honor and recognition. The designs depicted mountains, rivers, and people working together, a representation of courage, kindness, and the bond of trust. Eli held it tightly, feeling the weight not of the object itself, but of the meaning it carried. Takoda gestured toward the boy, then toward the medallion he already possessed. Eli understood immediately. The warriors were acknowledging him not as a child, but as someone who had acted with courage and integrity, someone whose actions had bridged worlds. He felt a deep sense of humility and pride, understanding that his simple, consistent acts of kindness had earned respect that few could imagine. The warriors spoke in Takoda's language, their words flowing in a rhythm Eli could not understand, but the tone was gentle, filled with acknowledgement and admiration. Takoda translated as best he could through gestures, pointing to Eli, the pail of milk, and the small meals he had provided. Each gesture reinforced the boy's understanding that what he had done mattered, not just to Takoda, but to an entire community. The villagers, who had been watching from a distance, began to approach cautiously. Mothers held their children close, and elders observed with a mixture of curiosity and awe. When they saw the interactions in the clearing, the respectful gestures, the medallion, the gift of the carved token, they realized that Eli's courage had created not danger, but connection and honor. The fear that had once gripped the village slowly transformed into admiration. Eli's mother finally stepped into the clearing, her eyes wide with pride and relief. She knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Eli," she whispered, "you have done something extraordinary." The boy smiled, but his thoughts remained with Takoda and the warriors. He knew that the recognition he had received was important, but it was secondary to the knowledge that he had made a real difference in someone's life. The warriors remained in the clearing for several hours, sharing lessons, stories, and quiet laughter. They taught Eli simple skills for observing the land, caring for the injured, and moving through the forest with patience and attention. Takoda assisted, showing the boy practical lessons he could carry with him for the rest of his life. Eli listened carefully, absorbing the knowledge with a mixture of excitement and reverence. Each moment strengthened the boy's understanding of courage, empathy, and responsibility. By the afternoon, the warriors prepared to return to their lands. Before leaving, the lead warrior approached Eli once more, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. The gesture required no words. It was a final acknowledgement of respect, trust, and recognition. Eli understood fully. He had earned the admiration of an entire tribe not through strength, wealth, or status, but through the quiet, consistent practice of kindness and courage. Takoda smiled warmly, pride shining in his eyes, as the boy realized the magnitude of what had occurred. When the forest was finally quiet again, Eli sat beside Takoda beneath the familiar tree. The pail of milk sat empty, and the carved token rested in his hand. The boy felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that the weeks of effort, care, and attention had culminated in a moment of profound connection. Takoda, now fully recovered in both body and spirit, looked at Eli with an expression that conveyed gratitude beyond words. The bond between them was unbreakable, forged through trust, courage, and compassion. Eli returned to the village that evening with a sense of calm pride. The villagers greeted him with admiration, their previous fear replaced by respect. Mothers whispered to their children about the boy who had shown courage and empathy, and elders nodded in approval. Even those who had doubted him now recognized the power of his actions. Eli's mother embraced him tightly, relief and pride mingling in her eyes. "You have shown us all what courage looks like," she said softly, "and you have shown what kindness can do." The next morning, Eli rose with the same determination he had each day, but now he carried a new understanding of the world. The forest was no longer just a place of healing. It was a place of connection, learning, and growth. Takoda and the boy spent their mornings together, practicing the lessons learned from the warriors, exploring the clearing, and observing the land. Each day was filled with purpose, and Eli felt a sense of confidence and responsibility he had never known before. Over time, Eli's story spread beyond the village. Travelers, traders, and neighbors spoke of the boy who had cared for a wounded man, whose courage and kindness had earned the respect of an entire tribe. The forest clearing became a symbol of hope and connection, a place where acts of compassion could create bridges between worlds. Eli understood that his actions, though small, had consequences far greater than he could have imagined. Takoda remained a constant presence in the boy's life. Though he eventually returned to his tribe, the bond they shared endured. The lessons of trust, courage, and empathy remained with Eli, shaping the way he approached life, relationships, and challenges. The medallion and the carved token became treasured symbols, reminders of the enduring power of kindness and the profound impact of small, consistent actions. Years later, Eli would remember the early mornings, the long walks to the clearing, and the moments of care that had defined his childhood. He would remember the fear, the uncertainty, and the quiet moments of triumph. Most of all, he would remember the lesson that had guided him through life. That courage and compassion, even from the smallest person, could change lives, unite communities, and leave a legacy that would last for generations. The story of the poor little boy and the dying Apache became a tale told by the elders in the village, a story of hope, bravery, and human connection. Children grew up hearing it, inspired to act with kindness, courage, and integrity. The forest clearing, once a place of danger and uncertainty, had become a symbol of the power of empathy and the extraordinary results that could come from a single, selfless act. Eli, now older, often walked through the forest alone, remembering the first day he had found Takoda. He would pause beneath the familiar tree, touch the ground where they had shared so many quiet moments, and feel a deep sense of gratitude. The boy who had once been small, poor, and uncertain had become a person shaped by courage, kindness, and the enduring bonds of trust. He understood that life's greatest lessons often came in the form of simple actions, repeated consistently with heart and intention. And so the forest remained, quiet and alive, carrying the memory of a boy, a man, and the warriors whose presence had honored courage, kindness, and the unbreakable power of human connection. The boy's story, once small and unseen, had grown to touch countless lives, reminding all who heard it that even the smallest acts could leave the largest impact.